I've tried to ignore all the stench.
Hello dears, and welcome to my show. I'm your friendly neighborhood librarian, reading the stinkers and praising the masterpieces since 2012. Okay, so let's talk about Hannibal Lecter. Only the most iconic sociopath in horror movie and crime fiction history, right? Right. Well, I had not read any of the Thomas Harris novels or seen any of the Hannibal Lecter movies before picking up this novel. And I think that sort of worked against me, but for me at the same time, and I'll explain what that means in a bit. But suffice it to say that I knew what Hannibal Lecter's character was. I knew that he was cultured, an educated man. I knew that he was a doctor and he studied people's minds, but he had this broken mind of his own and he murdered people. What's not to like? That's what attracted me to these books. So imagine my surprise when Hannibal Lecter gets about maybe 3 scenes in this nearly 450-page book, and he is not the main antagonist, or even a main character, really. It was literally, okay, I'm gonna read about Hannibal Lecter, I'm gonna read about Hannibal Lecter, this is gonna be so awesome! Wait, who's Dolarhyde? Well, without any further ado, let's dive right into Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. As always, I'll take you through the basic story first. Will Graham, an ex-FBI agent, is a troubled man with a knack for finding and stopping psychotic serial killers. Among these is the famous Hannibal Lecter, a doctor with a penchant for murder. Will's idyllic life with his wife and stepson is interrupted when his help is requested to catch a new killer, called the Tooth Fairy by the press. Will is hesitant to do this for 3 main reasons. 1, his line of work leads to marital problems. 2, he was forced to shoot and kill the last psychopath he found in self-defense. And 3, he secretly worries that he can so easily slip into a murderer's mindset because he himself has a high potential to be a monster. And that is where our story begins. This is not a slasher novel. You don't see too many blood and guts. And what you do see, what is detailed in a clinical manner. The squeamish could read this with no problem, but what's the fun of a murder mystery without a little gore? The answer to that is characters. This book has characters up the wazoo. They vary in degrees of importance, but I would submit that every single character we're introduced to is important. This is an ensemble effort, and they're all developed well and interact with each other naturally. The world of Red Dragon is a well-developed world. It feels real, like it's populated by real people. But at the same time, it doesn't feel exactly like our world. This is a largely surrealistic novel. The characters all seem to have something in common, that being that they are all above average intelligence and that they are very intuitive. The dialogue is very, shall we say, stylized because of this. At times I felt like the dialogue was some of the most stilted, awkward writing I had ever come across, but at other times it took my breath away with its gentle, deep poeticness and its philosophy. Generally, the dialogue was weakest when everyday scenes were occurring. For example, the conversations between Will and his wife Molly. The two almost seemed to be engaged in a constant chess game with each other, constantly picking out thoughts out of each other's heads. It was bizarre. But on the flip side of that, we have these really intense and well-written confrontations between Will and Hannibal Lecter, as well as the dialogue between Will and another investigator, Jack Crawford. Jack Crawford is the closest thing to a friend that Will has. Jack is respectful of Will's gift in analysis, has faith in Will, and is constantly playing this precarious game of tiptoeing around Will's fear, insecurity, and damaged psyche while still trying to treat him like any other investigator. As long as we're talking about the investigation, there is something I want to address about the writing style. Much attention is given to the ins and outs of police work. There are complicated, fast-paced sequences on forensic analysis, fingerprinting, even paperwork. It certainly isn't glamorized, which is appreciated on an intellectual level, but at the same time it wasn't accessible to the layman. It seemed to grind the action to a halt, and it just wasn't very entertaining to read. However, boring parts of a book are often necessary evils, and Red Dragon is no exception. The book would have felt incomplete without the details of this investigation that Will finds himself more and more immersed in. Now, I would consider Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter to be arch-nemesis. Nemesis? Okay. Does it make me a bad librarian? Do I have to turn in my library card if I say that I honestly don't care whether I got that right? Well, actually, that's a lie. It does bug me a bit. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Hannibal. This book isn't about Hannibal. Hannibal is already behind bars by the time the book starts. His nemesis Will has already moved on, solved another case, and since retired from the FBI. But I think it's a testament to the strength of Hannibal's character that he has a pervading presence throughout the novel and in Will's life. In fact, in the movie version, Hannibal is given top billing over the actual antagonist of the story, and both the front and back covers of the book advertise it as introducing Hannibal Lecter. The backstory between Hannibal and Will was some of the most compelling literature I have ever read. It was also very sparse. I found myself dying to know more about Hannibal's past and history with Will, which, incidentally, is what I think the other books in the series are about. But Red Dragon as a standalone left me curious and very interested in getting to know these characters more. A common flaw I see in literature is that many a time the characters will feel like people expressly made up for the story. They don't seem to have pasts. But here, all the characters' dirty laundry and baggage affects them in sometimes infuriating but always realistic ways. I can't help but feel that the intensity of Hannibal Lecter's charisma actually worked against Red Dragon. I know I just spent a lot of time singing Hannibal Lecter's praises, but the fact remains that Red Dragon really isn't his story. This story belongs to Will Graham and Francis Dolarhyde. Dolarhyde's character and his own rivalry with Will suffers because Hannibal steals the show. This story has a lot of amazing characters, but there can be too much of a good thing. This book felt busy. Too many subplots, too many characters competing for the limelight, too many points of view. Now the backstory between Hannibal and Will seems simple enough. Hannibal led a double life as a psychologist and a cannibal, and Will turned out to be just the agent to foil his plans because he wasn't exactly stable himself. It's a simple story in that there aren't too many elements or characters at play, and it's straightforward, not convoluted. But there's still room for depth and intrigue there. I feel that in many cases, Thomas Harris's writing style included, less is definitely more. Here in Red Dragon we have Will struggles with his marriage to Molly and being a stepfather to her son, his guilt over the murder he had to commit, the murders of Francis Dolarhyde, Dolarhyde's backstory, which includes a mother who didn't want him, bullying because of his hair lip, and a domineering, subtly abusive grandmother. And on top of that we have Dolarhyde's burgeoning romance with a blind woman named Reba, and let's not forget the meddling of sleazy journalist Freddie Lowndes. And that's only a handful of the plots in that thing. You'd think with a novel so chock full of stuff that it wouldn't take time to stop and breathe, but actually most of the novel is fairly slow-paced. There's a constant feeling of anticipation. The realism of a police investigation is that it involves a lot of waiting. But interestingly, in a neat bit of juxtaposition, the life of a serial killer also seems to involve a lot of waiting. But with so many plots going on, it felt like the novel should have been a little more fast-paced, so the pacing felt uneven as a result. Francis Dolarhyde is the one committing the murders that happen during the story. Too bad he feels so inconsequential most of the time. It's not that he's a badly written character, it's just that He falls flat in comparison to Hannibal. Now, part of this is because his past is all laid out, whereas Hannibal is a mystery. But it's more than that. Dolarhyde is difficult to understand. And I'm not saying that as a cheap shot at his hair, lip-induced speech impediment.
Oh, son of a gun.
I know it's a weird complaint to say that I found it hard to understand a psychotic killer, but as the book went on and I adjusted to the surreal world and fell into the beat of the characters, I started to realize that I was becoming better and better at entering into character psyches. They might be deranged and horrible, but I was still sort of learning to understand their motivations and to speak the languages of their minds. Enter Dolarhyde, who apparently has a split personality inspired by a painting, who falls in love at the drop of a dime and ends up responsible for a fake-out ending. His motivations are murky at best, and that should serve to make him scarier. But it just doesn't. Hannibal is scary because even though he's utterly insane, he still sort of makes sense. There's a reason that Hannibal Lecter is remembered over Francis Dolarhyde. Any writer will tell you that the hardest parts of constructing a story are thinking of a way to begin and finding a way to end. I didn't know what to expect going into this novel. It starts with Will enjoying a day on the beach with his family, so it certainly doesn't set up the atmosphere for the rest of the story. But it's not really a slow scene either, as Jack Crawford arrives to enlist Will's help in capturing the Tooth Fairy. The dialogue is stilted, and Thomas Harris sets up an unfortunate precedent in that he loses dialogue tags altogether after the first few lines of conversation. I love that I'm not being patronized the whole time as a reader and that my hand isn't being held, but at the same time, while I'm just getting to learn the characters, I feel like a few reminders of who's speaking wouldn't hurt. The story didn't have a really strong, gripping beginning. I feel almost as if Thomas Harris tried to make up for this by making the ending as spectacular as possible, but this fell flat on its face in a very grand way. Spoiler alert! There are actually two endings to this story. The first one feels bizarre, and it doesn't add up. The reader's led to believe that Dolarhyde kills himself in a very spectacular way involving guns and fire. But he kidnapped his girlfriend first, so he kidnaps his girlfriend, then kills himself and lets her go free? In addition, the last time that we'd been in his point of view, he thought that he was about to get caught, and his mind starts working furiously in self-preservation. Plus, with this ending, Will never confronts Dolarhyde or really catches him. So the book and Will's journey all feels pointless with an anticlimax like that. That isn't the real ending. Dolarhyde faked that death and reappears later trying to kill Will. This is exciting, but it ends up in another anticlimax, as Will and Dolarhyde don't exchange many words before Will's wife Molly shoots and kills Dolarhyde. For real this time.
As coroner, I must cover, I thoroughly examined her, and she's not only merely dead, she's really most sincerely dead.
The problem was, the closer I got to the end, the more impatient I got for the story to finally conclude. It seemed to be dragging its feet and stretching itself out, and when it finally ended, it didn't really end, the story didn't end, the author just stopped writing. Will's family life seems to be crumbling with no hope of reconciliation, and frustratingly, Will and Molly refuse to just talk about it like normal people. The point of view changed throughout the book. It was limited to one character's knowledge, but in third person. Shifts were seamless, but screwed with suspense at times. For example, the reader knows from Dolarhyde's first appearance that he's the murderer, which sort of makes the murder mystery thing a little moot. I ended up frustrated by the dramatic irony that the reader already knew what the investigators were taking so long to try to figure out. Red Dragon has been adapted into 2 movies, one released in 1986 called Manhunter, and one called Red Dragon, which came out in 2002. They're very different adaptations of the same work. The script is the exact same at some points, but the interpretations of the actors are different. In Manhunter, Will is more true to the book and just barely saner than the killers. In Red Dragon, Will comes across as a genuinely upright, moral guy. Dolarhyde in Manhunter is mysterious, but not developed as well as he could have been. Dolarhyde in Red Dragon is more true to the book. There's more of his backstory, and I'm biased because of the actor Ralph Fiennes, who plays my favorite Heathcliff. The Hannibals are different, but surprisingly, both are close to the book. The Hannibal of the book was full of contradictions. In Manhunter, he quickly evaluates a person and starts to manipulate them. He has a bigger role in Red Dragon than in Manhunter or the book, but that change worked for a stronger movie. Hannibal in Red Dragon, the movie, is methodical but unsettling, professional but undeniably dangerous. Both movies had strong acting and atmosphere, really important for this kind of movie. I'd recommend them both. Would I recommend the book? Yes, but it's better to experience with no expectations. I expected more Hannibal, to be honest, which worked against my impression of the book in that I was disappointed, but worked for me in that I was delightfully surprised and the experience was less predictable. In general, the characters are memorable, exceedingly real, and well written. You might get lost sometimes because the author doesn't like to put many reminders in the text. If you miss a fact the first time, it might not be repeated. And without at least a rudimentary understanding of police work, you might find yourself overwhelmed. I was unimpressed with the weak beginning and outlandish ending. It was jarring. The quality of the writing near the end suffered to such a degree that it was as if someone else had written the rest of the book. For the most part, despite severe missteps, I was entertained, and though some big choices just didn't work, I have to admire an author who commits to taking risks. Overall, I give Red Dragon 3 stars out of 5. While I'd recommend the books, I'd recommend both movies a tiny bit more. This story, like The Hunger Games, worked better in a visual medium. Unlike in The Hunger Games, I never felt like this was a cash cow Thomas Harris wrote in the hopes that it would be adapted into a movie. It just so happened that this book works very well as a movie. 2, in fact. I'd recommend the movie Red Dragon just a little bit more because Manhunter has aged, but both films are great and surpass their source material by a little margin, with a grade of 4 stars out of 5. So, I know what you're thinking. Friendly Neighborhood Librarian, you said you'd review literature other than novels. What gives? Well, I think it's about time I made good on that promise. Join me next time when my inner otaku gets a chance to shine as we explore Jigoku Shoujo, or Hell Girl. Till next time, I'm your friendly neighborhood librarian, signing out.